In the early 19th century, Japan was a quiet and isolated country. For more than 200 years, it had closed its doors to most of the outside world. Foreign ships were not welcome, foreign traders were rarely allowed to enter, and Japanese people were not allowed to leave the country. The rulers of Japan believed that this isolation would protect their traditions and culture. At that time, the country was ruled by the Tokugawa shogunate, a military government led by powerful samurai families. The emperor existed, but he had very little real power. The shogun and his officials controlled the country. Life in Japan followed strict rules. Society was divided into classes. At the top were the samurai, the warrior class who served powerful lords called daimyo. Below them were farmers, craftsmen, and merchants. Samurai carried swords and followed a code of honor known as bushido. They were respected and feared by ordinary people. Farmers worked hard in the rice fields and paid taxes to their lords. Craftsmen made tools and goods, while merchants traded products in towns and cities. For a long time, this system seemed stable and unchangeable. Japanese cities like Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto were busy and lively, but the country itself remained closed to foreign influence. However, the world outside Japan was changing rapidly. Western countries were becoming more powerful because of new technology, industry, and modern armies. Countries like Britain, France, and the United States were expanding their influence across Asia. In 1853, a dramatic event changed Japan forever. A fleet of American warships arrived in Tokyo Bay under the command of Commodore Matthew Perry. The ships were large, black, and powerful, unlike anything most Japanese people had seen before. Smoke rose from their engines, and their cannons were capable of destroying coastal defenses. Perry carried a message from the President of the United States. He demanded that Japan open its ports to American ships for trade and supplies. The Japanese government was shocked and frightened. They knew their military was not strong enough to fight against modern Western weapons. After months of discussion and worry, the shogunate agreed to sign a treaty with the United States. Soon similar treaties were signed with other Western countries. These agreements opened Japanese ports to foreign trade and allowed foreigners to live and work in certain areas. Many people in Japan were angry about these treaties. They believed the government had shown weakness. Some samurai felt that the country had lost its honor. At the same time, others realized that Japan needed to change quickly if it wanted to survive in a world dominated by powerful Western nations. The country faced a difficult choice: remain traditional and risk being controlled by foreigners, or modernize and become strong enough to protect itself. During the 1860s, political tension grew across Japan. Many young samurai and leaders began to support the emperor rather than the shogun. They believed the emperor should lead the nation and guide it into a new future. These reformers wanted to learn from the West and strengthen Japan. Their slogan was simple but powerful: revere the emperor and expel the barbarians. However, many of them later realized that completely rejecting foreign knowledge would be a mistake. In 1868, a major political revolution took place. The power of the Tokugawa shogunate collapsed, and authority returned to the emperor. This event is known as the Meiji Restoration. The young Emperor Meiji became the symbol of a new Japan. Although he was still young, the leaders around him were determined to transform the country. The new government quickly began to introduce major reforms. One of their first actions was to end the feudal system that had existed for centuries. The daimyo lost their independent power, and the central government took control of the country. Samurai privileges were gradually removed, and the class system began to disappear. Many samurai were forced to find new jobs as teachers, officials, or soldiers. The leaders of Japan believed that education was the key to national strength. They created a modern education system and built schools across the country. Children were encouraged to study science, mathematics, and modern languages. Some of the brightest students were even sent to Europe and the United States to learn about industry, engineering, and government. At the same time, Japan began building modern infrastructure. Railways connected major cities, making travel and trade faster than ever before. Telegraph lines allowed messages to travel quickly across the country. Factories were built to produce textiles, machinery, and other industrial goods. The government invited foreign experts to teach Japanese workers new skills and technologies. The military was also transformed. Instead of relying on samurai warriors, Japan created a modern national army based on Western models. All young men were required to serve in the military. They were trained with modern rifles and artillery. The navy was rebuilt using advanced ships and strategies learned from Britain and other naval powers. These changes were not easy. Many people resisted the reforms, especially former samurai who had lost their status and privileges. In some places, rebellions broke out against the new government. One of the most famous uprisings was the Satsuma Rebellion in 1877, led by a former samurai leader. However, the modern Japanese army defeated the rebels, proving that the new system was stronger than the old one. As the years passed, Japan continued to modernize at an incredible speed. Cities grew larger, industries expanded, and the government became more organized and efficient. The country studied Western ideas but also tried to keep its own cultural identity. Traditional values such as loyalty, discipline, and respect for authority remained important in Japanese society. By the end of the 19th century, Japan had changed dramatically. In only a few decades, it had moved from a closed feudal society to a modern industrial nation. The reforms of the Meiji era created the foundation for Japan's future strength. The country was no longer weak or isolated. Instead, it was becoming a powerful nation ready to compete with the great powers of the world. This transformation did not happen overnight. It required courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to learn from others. But the people of Japan believed that modernization was necessary for survival. Their determination to reform their society would soon lead them to achieve something extraordinary. In the coming years, Japan would surprise the world and prove that it had become a nation capable of standing among the strongest powers on earth. By the late 19th century, Japan had already changed more than many people believed possible. Only a few decades earlier it had been a quiet, isolated country with a feudal system ruled by samurai and local lords. Now the nation was rapidly becoming modern. Railways connected cities, factories produced goods, and a new education system was preparing young people for a different future. The leaders of Japan believed that if their country wanted to survive in the modern world, it needed to become strong in every way, economically, politically, and militarily. The government encouraged the growth of industries across the country. At first, many factories were built and managed by the government itself. These factories produced textiles, steel, ships, and other important products. Textile factories became especially successful because silk and cotton were in high demand in international markets. Thousands of workers, many of them young women from rural areas, moved to cities to work in these factories. The conditions were often difficult, but these industries helped Japan build a strong economic foundation. Over time, the government began selling many factories to private business groups. These powerful companies eventually became known as large industrial families. They invested in banking, shipping, mining, and manufacturing. With their help, Japan's economy grew quickly. New ports were built to support international trade, and Japanese ships began traveling to many parts of the world. Education played a crucial role in this transformation. Schools were built across the country so that children could learn reading, writing, mathematics, and science. Universities were also established to train engineers, doctors, and government officials. Many teachers were inspired by Western educational systems but also emphasized discipline and loyalty to the nation. Young people were taught that their hard work would help Japan become strong and respected. At the same time, the Japanese military continued to modernize. The army adopted training methods and strategies from European countries, while the navy studied the powerful fleets of Britain. Military leaders believed that a strong defense was necessary to protect Japan from foreign control. They also believed that Japan needed to prove its strength to the rest of the world. During this period, tensions between Japan and its neighbors began to increase. Korea became an important issue because both China and Japan wanted influence over the Korean peninsula. Korea was strategically important and also rich in resources. In 1894, a conflict between China and Japan finally turned into war. The war between the two countries surprised many people around the world. China had traditionally been seen as the most powerful nation in East Asia, while Japan was still considered a newcomer to modern power. However, Japan's modern army and navy proved highly effective. Japanese forces won several important battles on land and sea. Their soldiers were well trained and disciplined, and their equipment was modern. After several months of fighting, China was defeated. In 1895, the war ended with a treaty that recognized Japan's growing influence in the region. Japan gained control of new territories and received financial compensation. The victory shocked many Western nations because it showed that Japan had successfully modernized its military and government. For the first time in modern history, an Asian country had defeated a large regional power using modern warfare. Japan's confidence grew after this victory, but the country's leaders knew that greater challenges still existed. One of those challenges came from the Russian Empire. Russia had been expanding its influence in East Asia and was building military bases and railways in areas close to Japanese interests. Both countries wanted control over parts of Manchuria and Korea, which created rising tension between them. In 1904, war broke out between Japan and Russia. Many people around the world expected Russia to win easily because it was a huge empire with a large army and vast resources. Japan was much smaller and had fewer soldiers. However, Japan had something very important: preparation and determination. Japanese military leaders planned their strategy carefully. Their navy launched a surprise attack on Russian ships at Port Arthur, which damaged Russia's naval power in the region. Japanese forces then fought several difficult battles on land. These battles were costly and intense, but Japanese soldiers continued to fight with discipline and courage. One of the most important moments of the war occurred at sea. The Japanese Navy faced the Russian Baltic Fleet, which had traveled thousands of kilometers from Europe to join the conflict. In a dramatic naval battle, Japanese ships defeated the Russian fleet with remarkable skill and organization. This victory became one of the most famous naval battles in modern history. In 1905, the war ended with Japan's victory. The result shocked the entire world. For the first time in modern history, an Asian nation had defeated a major European power in a large-scale war. Many countries began to see Japan as a serious global force. The victory also inspired people in other Asian nations who hoped that modernization could help them resist foreign domination. After the war, Japan's international reputation increased greatly. The country gained influence in Korea and other nearby regions. At home, pride and national confidence grew. People believed that their nation had proven its strength and determination. The rapid modernization that had begun during the Meiji era had achieved something extraordinary in a very short time. Japan also continued to expand its industries and infrastructure. Factories produced steel, ships, and machinery, while railways and ports improved transportation and trade. Cities grew larger and more modern, and Japan became one of the most industrialized countries in Asia. International trade increased, bringing wealth and new opportunities to the country. Despite its rapid success, Japan still faced many challenges. Industrialization created social problems such as difficult working conditions and economic inequality. Political debates also became more common as people discussed the future direction of the nation. However, the country's leaders continued to focus on strengthening Japan's position in the world. In only about 50 years, Japan had transformed itself from a feudal society into a modern industrial and military power. This remarkable change was the result of strong leadership, national unity, and a willingness to learn from other countries while preserving important cultural traditions. The determination of the Japanese people allowed them to overcome enormous challenges and build a powerful nation. By the early 20th century, Japan was no longer an isolated island nation at the edge of the world. It had become a country whose decisions and actions could influence international events. Other nations now recognized Japan as one of the important powers of the modern world. The transformation that began with the reforms of the Meiji era had succeeded in reshaping the country's future and placing Japan among the strongest nations on earth.